Last week's commentary was dedicated to a will. Two wills, actually. The will of Pope Benedict and the last words he said before he died. This week, I want to talk about another will, although perhaps that is not the right word. I am talking about Cardinal Pell, who has just died. And he has left a written article, a posthumous article, because it had not yet been published at the time of his death. But before Cardinal Pell's death, many things have happened this week. As soon as Pope Benedict XVI died, a rumor began to circulate insistently that Pope Francis was about to resign, and that if he had not done so, it was because he did not want there to exist two emeritus popes. This rumor that Pope Francis is going to resign has been with him since almost the beginning of his pontificate. I have already said before that the Pope is not a person, at least I think, that he is not the kind of person who quits. It is true that his health is not perfect. He is 86 years old. It is true that his knee problem has not been solved, and that undoubtedly it must be causing him severe pain in spite of the painkillers. But it seems to me that if he had something more serious, the doctors would not allow him to go on this trip to the Congo and South Sudan in a few days. Of course, at 86 years of age, anything can happen, a serious deterioration of his health. But if this does not happen, my opinion is that Pope Francis will not resign, contrary to what some people say or wish. The second thing that has been raised this week is that now Pope Francis is going to be able to govern as he wants to govern, because up to now, supposedly, if he has not done so, it has been because the existence of Pope Benedict was holding him back. According to them, Pope Benedict was a kind of catalyst of discontent, and if he had not been there, Francis would have done other things. I repeat, the same as with the resignation, it does not seem to me that Pope Francis is a type of person who limits himself, especially when he was aware, when he knew that Benedict was going to remain silent no matter what happened. There is the proof: silence before the publication of Amoris Laetitia, silence before the publication of Traditionis Custodis, and silence before certain very important appointments, which, of course, did not please Benedict at all, because they went against what he had done and how he had governed the church. Pope Benedict kept silent, and Pope Francis knew that and was continuing on it. That is why I do not believe that the absence of Pope Benedict will free Pope Francis, as some say, and he will be able to be himself from now on. It seems to me, and of course I could be wrong, that these things are going to continue in the same way as they had been up to now, unless there are surprises, because life certainly always has surprises. The third event of this week has been the publication of the book of the personal secretary of Pope Benedict, Monsignor Gaswin. The book is entitled Nothing But the Truth, and has been welcomed almost universally as a revenge of Gaswin against Francis for having removed him as prefect of the pontifical household, as a harsh attack against Francis. It seems to me that those who think this I do not know if they know Godwin or not. I personally do not know him. I believe that those who think this have forgotten that there are people who know how to be faithful to their friends. Simply like that. There are people who know how to be faithful to their friends in the middle of a crowd. That changes from one moment to another. The unbreakable fidelities who change them from one to another and from one moment to another. And that the same was very faithful to one is very faithful to the next, even if they do not have much to do. Or just as there are many who have made silence their way of survival, there are some, even if there are few, who know how to be faithful to their friends. It seems to me that what Godwin has done is an act of love and fidelity to someone he appreciated very much and considered his teacher, someone he took care of his body and soul, the Pope Emeritus, Pope Benedict XVI. It does not seem to me that it is an attack against, but a plea in favor of. And it has allowed us to know in reality how an emeritus pope should act. Because if we have seen that in front of things that he did not like, Benedict was silent. Benedict stayed quiet. In the same way, an emeritus pope will have to behave in the future if emeritus popes will exist again. Then came the death of Cardinal Pell, a truly unforeseen event, a seemingly simple operation in which his heart failed him. The first thing to do, is to pray for his soul, so that God may give him the peace that his enemies try to take away from him without success. His enemies from outside and his enemies from within the church. Pell is a confessor. Pell is a martyr without bloodshed. His defense of the church, his desire to collaborate with Francis, who had put him at the head of the finances of the church for that purpose, earned him so many enemies who accused him of something absurd, which did not have the slightest hint of plausibility, and yet, with judges suspiciously in favor of the ridiculous, he was sent to prison, where he was for more than a year in solitary confinement, where he could have stayed for the rest of his life. Fortunately, the High Court of Australia decided that the conviction was absurd and had no legal basis, acquitted him and released him. But Pell, who was never one to keep quiet, Pell had written an article that had not been published when his death came surprisingly, unexpectedly. That article, known later, could be said to be a testament. It is a very hard allegation against the Synod of Synodality, not against the Synod of Germany, but against the Synod of Synodality. It is a very hard allegation. He says it is. He qualifies it as follows: a nightmare from which we must get rid of as soon as possible, which is something, his words, the draft that has already been published, which is an incoherent document, the most incoherent document ever published in Rome, he says. Well, this is a plea signed by someone who has authority, had moral authority in the church. However, it does not seem to me that this harsh criticism from the late Cardinal Pell on the Synod of Synodality will have much effect. And it does not seem to me that it will have much effect because his was already a voice crying in the wilderness. It has also been said these days that he is the author of a document that circulated among the cardinals last year, and which is a fierce criticism of the pontificate of Francis. The document is authored under a pseudonym, Demos, people, and criticizes all the points that seem to the author to be contrary to the doctrine, teaching, and tradition of the Church in this pontificate. However, it is a document written with a pseudonym, that is to say, an anonymous one. To attribute this document to Cardinal Pell seems to me to be risky if one is not certain, that is to say so. I think that what Pell has actually said, not only with that article where he describes the synod of synodality as a toxic nightmare, but attributing Demos to Cardinal Pell is not necessary and seems to me really risky. It is much better to see what Pell has said with all certainty in order to meditate on it and draw conclusions. One of the conclusions to be drawn is that the Church is subject to very strong internal tensions. I think this is evident. It is unquestionable. Apart from being informed, which we must be, the most important thing in this complicated moment is to pray. To pray. To ask God, our Lord, who does exist, although some seem to have forgotten him, to ask God, our Lord, to hear the cry of his people, as the book of Genesis tells us that he did with the Israelite slaves in Egypt, to hear the cry of his suffering people, and to come soon to liberate them. See you next week, God willing.